Please take your seats and silence your devices. Our afternoon plenary session is about to begin.
Welcome to SOCAP19. When I look out at this room, I've had the privilege and honor of being part of this community for 8 years now, and I know that among you there are many who predate me, who have been here for all 12 years of SOCAP. Let's see, anyone here? Predates 8 years, let's say. You don't have to be all 12. And then I know there's many of you who are new this year. Who's new? Who's first SOCAP? Wow, awesome. You're the best at attending sessions. You win. Thank you for adding your voice and for being here. And I know it's a big commitment to take the week and to get here. So thank you for being here. I'm also thinking about the people from this community who are joining us from afar via live stream. And they've been really on my mind this year. This is such a valuable room. The people in this room have ideas and organizations and resources that are making amazing change in the world. But there's also so many people who are not in this room. And this year I've really been thinking of them. I believe deeply in the power of convening, of bringing valuable strangers together to create unlikely allies. And I'm so excited and inspired every year by the collaboration that takes place here and what springs from it. But, and this year, apologies, so when we're all here together, you know many people already, and you're here to meet new people as well. We've partnered with Braindate this year to create a topic marketplace where you can find others to connect with and share with. And I encourage you to go on there and meet some new people, not just the people you know while you're here. But I also believe that this can't just be an event. It needs to be a movement. If we're going to unlock the potential of markets to drive impact, it's going to take all of us. And what that really is going to require is a culture shift. The dominant culture around finance and money and business is unsustainable, and it's being challenged regularly. But shifting, a real culture shift, doesn't require just events like this. It requires art and media and influence and stories. And we have great stories in this room, but I'm not sure that we're sharing them widely enough. A few years ago, we created SOCAP19 to take this show on the road. And the amazing thing to me was that 2/3 of the people who showed up weren't even on our mailing list. They'd heard about it from a friend and they showed up. It sounded interesting. A year ago, we started a podcast, Money and Meaning. How many of you have listened to our podcast? Way more of you should. It gets over 2,000 downloads a month. It's incredible. And so I'm just constantly reminded of the people who are searching for this conversation and have never even heard of impact investing, much less heard of SOCAP. But I know that all of the people who care about climate change would be devastated to know that they're invested in fossil fuels. And I know that so many people who are out protesting for criminal justice would be horrified to know that their banks, where they keep their deposits and do their checking and banking, are lobbying on behalf of private prisons. I also know that they would be inspired to invest with whatever they can invest, into the amazing climate entrepreneurs that we have here and use their influence to advance racial equity. This can't be a conversation for the 1%. It needs to be a conversation for everyone. I titled this plenary, A Global Movement That Matters to Millions. And I hope that you're inspired by the lineup of speakers and the ambition that's within this room, the change that's already happened and the change that we're aspiring to. You are part of a movement. So let's make the most of this time here together at SOCAP, and then let's go out and tell it to millions. Share these stories, make it as accessible as we can, and build the movement at the intersection of money and meaning. Thank you for joining us here.
With a special announcement from the Rockefeller Foundation, please welcome to the stage Roy Steiner and Sarah Farley.
Hello, everyone. My name is Roy Steiner.
And I'm Sarah Farley. We're from the food team of the Rockefeller Foundation, here to talk about the future of food.
You know, when we started thinking about the future and future visions, we took a look at what movies and books are out there that describe the future. And there's hundreds of them. And when you do look at that, the unfortunate thing is 98% of them are dystopian. They're really dark. They're Mad Max, Hunger Games, Black Mirror. The list just keeps going on. You actually have to really search to find a book or a movie that describes a world you would actually want to live in. So we spend hundreds of millions of dollars describing worlds we don't want and almost nothing describing really the vision of future we actually want. And when you look at the food system, you actually can fall into that pattern as well. We all know the challenges of poor diets, and we all know the impact of the agricultural system on climate change, et cetera, and the list goes on. The challenge, of course, dystopia has actually a role. It creates energy, some fear, and by the way, they actually make pretty good stories. But if you only have dystopia, you actually can't create the world you actually want because it doesn't unleash. There's always two creations, first in your mind and then in reality. And you don't unleash the creativity and the innovation you need if you can't imagine it. And there's a parable that says, where there is no vision, the people perish. And I think that's a 2,000-year-old wisdom. And I think we're in a culture that's at risk of perishing because we actually can't envision the world that could be if we make the right decisions. So, in light of that, in order to address that and unleash some positive forces into the world, the Rockefeller Foundation is announcing today the creation of the Food System Vision Prize, which will be a $2 million prize that will go around the world, up to 10 winners. But it's not the cash that's going to be the most amazing thing, is we're going to really work with these visionaries to give them visual artists and data scientists and science fiction writers to really bring their visions to light. Because we just found out last month, the Secretary General of the United Nations has announced that in 2021, there's going to be the first ever Food Systems Summit. And we hope that these visions will be visions that really represent the incredible diversity of food systems in the world. And the voices of the people that need to be heard will be heard at the global level. So, we want to move from the dystopian, the surviving, the incremental solutions to really things that are optimistic, that are thriving, that are really transformative. And in order to do that, we're asking groups, companies, NGOs, universities, governments, anybody who wants to think about the future, to describe the food system of 2050 in their local regional area. Not for the entire globe, that's too abstract, but in your town, your village, your food system, your food shed. And we think by doing that, you're going to get a lot more connected. It's going to require a lot more conversations and really create dialogue. And if we do that right, we think this will really inspire people in a way that is needed because they can now see it. We'll discover the knowledge that's both needed, the research priorities we need to go in that direction, but also uncover knowledge that's already there. There's incredible wisdom from indigenous peoples and philosophies and groups out there. And then thirdly, we want to connect people together because sharing of ideas creates incredible movements. And then finally, I think we're going to unleash a set of innovations that are going to be needed to create the food system that we want. So what is this promise of a vision? I think I have to admit that at times I can get pessimistic. I think we all can at times. But I'm only a short-term pessimist. I'm a long-term optimist. To get through the darkness that can potentially happen, I think we need lights of a vision to help guide us. We need North Stars. And that's what this vision process, we hope, will unleash. And in order to describe that in a little bit more detail, I'm going to hand it over to Sarah.
Great. Thanks, Roy. So you might be wondering, how could you possibly take hundreds, maybe thousands of potential food systems visions and compare them to select winners to give them a large prize? We thought a lot about that. So I want to share with you a little bit about what we're thinking in terms of evaluation criteria. One, we're thinking about systems, truly a systems-focused approach. So often in food, as in water, other sectors, we look at very isolated parts of the challenge and the solution set, and we miss the mess, the interconnections between technology, policy, culture, environment. So we really want to embrace this systems approach. Second, we're looking for visions that are really, truly transformational. These are audacious shifts from where we are to where we need to be. Third, we're not looking for anyone to put themselves forward as a visionary that sort of imposes their thoughts of what a community should do. We want these to be inclusive, led by communities and engaging communities. Fourth, We want to ask all of the visionaries to explain in some way what they're assuming about the evolution of science and technology from today to 2050 that would make their idea of the future plausible. And finally, we want these to be inspirational. Roy talked about hope. We need the hope, and what we want is for these visions to inspire a movement. So another way to get at this idea of what a vision is and how we articulate it, is to put forward tough questions that we'll be asking all of you, who we hope will apply for this prize, and everyone around the world. So if we think about the environmental shifts and climate change, to take one phenomenon, even if we curb greenhouse gas emissions, we know by the year 2050, the crops that grow in the particular agroecological zones in which they grow today likely may not be able to do so in 2050. So the question we'll ask each of you to answer is, how will your food system adapt to a changing climate to ensure resilience? Second, today, the #1 killer globally is diet-related disease, more than any other cause, which means our diets have to shift if we're to curb this tsunami of diet-related disease that is crushing the United States and headed for the developing world. So what is a healthy diet, a nutritious diet, going to look like in 2050? What do you hope it looks like? Third, whether we're looking at the performance of farms or the price paid for farm inputs and outputs, this all has consequence for consumers, policymakers, farmers, and other value chain actors. So how do we want profit to be shared in our food systems of 2050? Some projections suggest that between 50 and 80% of food and agricultural jobs will be replaced or outmoded by the year 2050 because of automation and artificial intelligence. So our question to visionaries is, what do you hope from these two particular technologies, automation and AI, in terms of the future of the workforce, how work is done in food and agriculture? And last, I think for so many of us, food is a source of community. It's a source of connection. It has this power to ignite creativity and spark joy. So how will we ensure that communities thrive in our future food systems? So imagine those and many other questions being offered up to anyone applying for the prize in the form of a toolkit. Our partners in design, Second Muse and Open IDEO, have been working with us to build this journey, really, that begins October 29th with the opening of the submission process. And this is really a set of tools, systems thinking, futures, and others, to really help contenders, applicants, try to think in really bold and new ways. So I want to go back to one of those movies where I talked about the dystopian phenomenon in so many pop culture movies, television shows. One of them, Minority Report, some folks might have seen it, paints a picture of a particular world infused with certain kinds of technology. And that world, for those of you who've seen it, might have seemed a little far-fetched. Actually, after the issuance of that film, more than 20 patents were filed for technologies featured in the movie Minority Report. So even these seemingly far-fetched ideas that come about as a function of ideating what our future could be like have application in the real world. So for us, with this Vision Prize, we really think this is the start of something very big. And for you, the investors, entrepreneurs assembled here at SOCAP, this is a chance to imagine and put forward ideas for what the investable innovations and social enterprises will be for the next century. And we think this is phenomenally important because we must first envision things to believe in them. And only once we believe it, can we build it. So we look forward to all of you joining us in this endeavor. We launch October 29th. Now, to make this conversation have a little more context, we have three amazing panelists who are going to come on stage and join Roy for a conversation. So welcome to the stage, Anna Lapay, Program Director of the Pantareya Foundation, Deb Eschemeyer, the new social entrepreneur and head of innovation of Arizona State University's Sweat Center for Sustainable Food Systems, and Manoj Sinha of Husk Power. Welcome to the stage.
All right,
you.
awesome. Thank you for coming and participating in this. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to just jump right in and ask the first question, which is a round robin. What do you think is the most important issue for the future of food systems? And I'll start with you, Nonash.
To give you a context, I come from a state called Bihar in India that has a lot of people, 110 million people, and we are a state where we don't have a whole lot of productivity when it comes to agriculture. So even though we have land, we are not producing as much as it could, and with a population of 110 million people, it is going to become even more challenging. So it is at a very basic level a shortage of food for a lot of people when it comes to nutrition or 2 square meals.
Deb.
Yeah, this is a really small question. And the thing is that there's obviously a lot of challenges, and you can talk about everything from climate change to the state of our democracy. But I would have to just say that I feel right now that the lack of empathy is one of our biggest challenges in the food system, because until individuals, corporations, and governments actually fully are sensitive to and aware of the impact of their decisions on people and the planet, we're actually going to just continue to see the injustice occur.
Yeah, well, I totally agree. And I would say, again, small question here, but when I think about what is the biggest problem in our food system, it's one we've had for a long time, which is it's never been a crisis of productivity, it has been a crisis of democracy. So what I mean by that is you can look around the world today, we are globally producing 2,900 calories for every single person on the planet, which if you don't count your calories, that's more than most people need. And yet UNICEF, you might have seen this, UNICEF just released its first significant global assessment of childhood nutrition in 20 years and found that 1 in 3 children is malnourished. So it's not a problem of not being enough, but that malnourishment is actually connected to not just not getting enough calories. For the most part, it's connected to getting actually too many calories of the wrong thing. So for instance, 62% of teenagers in industrialized countries drink a sugary drink a day. And only 42% of babies under 6 months old are exclusively breastfed. And so it's really this question of democracy, of who's deciding what products are being marketed to mothers and to children, what regulations are in place in our agricultural system, what kinds of food systems are being incentivized. And to me, the solution then to fixing food has to do with making sure more of us have a seat at the table to ask those questions and to offer up our answers.
Great. I think the challenge, as you said, it's not just quantity, it's quality and how the distribution takes place. So that's whenever you have transformation in the food system, there's some people that win and some people that lose. There's a whole question of equity that you just brought up. As we think about the future of food systems, how do we think we're going to actually manage that or deal with that? How do we ensure that everyone gets access to good food, quality food? Go ahead.
I'll do that again. So I see this so we are an energy company. We provide energy that farmers can use to irrigate their land and so on and so forth. So I see this problem from production perspective. And again, I'll take it back to states that we serve in India or Tanzania. They don't have irrigation system to irrigate, and therefore they cannot produce enough food to take it to the market. They're completely disconnected from the market system. So even though the land is very fertile, they're not able to produce as much as they can, and therefore they are not able to bring food to their own family that they should, which is kind of sad because the enabling factor to that production is missing to a large extent. Talking about democratization, they don't have a marketplace to sell their food. Half of the food they produce probably gets rotten because there's no refrigeration system, for example. So it's kind of a sad situation that you have a pretty fertile land and you cannot produce, and if you produce, you cannot sell or take it to the market where you should.
And this question is something that we considered a lot during the Obama administration, and specifically, obviously, economic security for all would be fantastic, but when I had the privilege of serving and being President Obama's nutrition policy advisor, I looked at every single federal nutrition policy and considered how it can be improved. specifically Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. How many of you are familiar with food stamps and SNAP, right? So that's impacting 45 million Americans. Half of those are children. That program, for example, should be reinforced and strengthened and have more investments put into it instead of right now where the eligibility requirements are being reconsidered and now there's fewer that are going to be able to receive this program. So that's an action that right now we can work harder to actually protect that program. That's one of the most impactful government programs that currently exists to provide food for all. The other thing I do want to mention, since this is about investment, is that I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but in the venture capital world, only 3% of the funds go to women-owned firms. That's pitiful. This is a fantastic opportunity to look at women-founded firms and how are you going to invest in that and put the strength back into the female-founded firms. Yes.
So picking up on what you were saying, Deb, I think about how do we ensure that whatever the future of food looks like, whether you are looking at these visions you all are talking about or the food systems we're looking to build, how do we ensure that actually they impact everyone equitably? And I think one of the ways we do that is being sure that we have those that could be most impacted, that are most closely in touch with our food system at the table. And so, it's looking at, in terms of the impact investing world, do you have farmers and food producers as advisors or on your boards if you're actually developing a technology in food? Do you have women? Do you have indigenous communities represented? Are you bringing those voices into your deliberations? And when I look at what are some of the most innovative technologies that have the greatest benefits to reducing biodiversity loss, averting the climate crisis, really building healthy food systems, those technological innovations have come out of having all of those people in the room and inside those conversations. So that, to me, feels like a really critical piece.
Yeah, it also makes me think about what the true cost of the current food system we have is actually. So here's a quick question. I ask this of everybody. One diet-related disease everybody knows of is diabetes. What do you think the cost of 1 year of diabetes care for the entire United States is? What do we spend on diabetes care? Just turn to your neighbor and just take a quick guess, okay? Just a quick guess. What do you think we're spending per year on diabetes care? All right, stop. How many people said around 50 billion? Is that under 50 billion or so? Okay, no, actually it's $327 billion. Wow. And I asked this of public health officials, and they're almost always off by almost an order of magnitude. Most people guess between 30 and 50 billion. And it tells me that we have just completely lost, and we spend $1 billion in nutrition research. We spend $5 billion on ag and food research. And even of that, 95% of that is going to 6 crops. And I think we've just got this system that is so out of balance. So the question is, how do we get that back into balance? And how do we really create a food system where that doesn't have all of these costs? So when you start thinking about what can change, what are you most excited by? I guess let me just throw out in terms of transformation, technologies, movements, what's getting you excited? Manoj.
So, I have the privilege, I guess, to see what vertical hydroponics is doing in North America. We don't even know about that in my own home state in India. So there are a lot of technologies that have been, I think, proven and is getting in very advanced stages. So we don't even have to invent those. So in my context in India, where we have 1.2 billion people to feed, we can actually take the best practices and leapfrog. We don't have to do that incremental discovery or invention. Take the best practices which is available, contextualize it to whatever you are doing, and make it happen at scale. And in our case, since we do energy as a service, we use the waste product of the crops that are grown to produce energy. So we are actually cutting carbon. So the climate problem we are solving by using the feedstock that gets generated as waste, right? So you have to evolve and move or take a leap to the next stage and not go through incremental steps to make that happen. And we are at disadvantage today because we are very far away from these developments, but we can take that leap and sort of start with a smartphone and not go through those dumb phones.
Yeah. And what, and what you do is just such a great example of creating a circular economy, which anybody who just takes a look at the food system sees the need for. Deb.
Yeah, what's giving me a lot of hope right now in where we are with the food system and many of the social change movements that we're working on is Gen Z. I have so much faith in the young people that are going to make up 40% of consumers by 2020 who are taking action in their own hands, whether it's climate change or it's gun reform, and it's going to force corporations to be transparent, to make it so that the Business Roundtable a few months ago just declared that they're going to be responsible towards all stakeholders and not just shareholders, and that's where we're going to actually see a serious transformation. So I'm seeing a lot of hope in what's to come.
And I don't know if you heard this, Deb, but or if any of you did, but I saw some young people talking about how they don't want to be called Gen Z because they're not the end of the line. They want to be Gen G and D or Gen Green New Deal. So you can start using that one. But I've also been super encouraged by the young people that we work with. And to me, I think one of the transformations that has been really thrilling to me, I've been kind of working in this world of food systems change for 2 decades as an author and a funder and an advocate. And there have been so many transformations that are really cause for hope. But actually one that I've been particularly thrilled by is actually a transformation inside of our minds, in our heads. And it's a transformation in how we think about food systems change and the connection between the conversation about food and the conversation about climate. And what I mean by that is about 10 years ago when I really started digging into this issue, the fact that the food system is responsible for 1/3 of all greenhouse gas emissions, so that's pretty significant, was news to me. And I remember at the time, An Inconvenient Truth had just come out, Al Gore's documentary, and there was a lot of conversation about climate, and very little conversation about this linkage between food and the climate crisis. Flash forward to now, and last week, Al Gore just convened a high-level conversation on his farm in Tennessee with policymakers and leaders and farmers and ranchers to talk about how if we're serious about climate, we have to talk about food. And that, to me, is this thrilling, thrilling change, that now people really understand that not only is our food system kind of this casualty of the crisis, right, farmers and ranchers on the front lines, it's also this key culprit, but also it's really this key part of the cure, that we can harness food systems to really help mitigate and adapt to climate change. So I feel like that's a really thrilling change that gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah, I'm actually also quite excited by the potential for the food system to address some of the greatest problems in our society. So climate change is one of them. The other is food systems actually bring really diverse people together, right? I mean, you think about the farmers market, that's when rural and urban people get together. If we're going to deal with the polarization in society, food has got to be part of that, like where you gather people around. The other is, I think the other big solution that the food system represents is for our diet and for health. And I didn't realize this, so I started talking to a lot of nutritionists and doctors out there. Do you know how many weeks doctors study nutrition in 4 years of medical school? Take a guess. It's actually, the recommended is 4 days, and the actual is 4 hours. And what that means is doctors graduate knowing nothing about nutrition, yet diet is 60 to 70% of non-communicable diseases are diet related. Like, in what universe does that make any sense? Okay, you're teaching doctors to cure, but you're ignoring the number one reason why people are ill, right? It just does not make sense, and it touches on what you've been talking about, is we have to start understanding how everything is linked and the connection between food and health, food and climate, food and equity, and I think that's the conversation that's going to happen. So we have the time for 30-second final thoughts. Manoj, one final thought.
For full disclosure, my wife is a doctor.
And you don't go to her for nutrition advice. Although I have to say, there's a lot of doctors really understand, for the doctors out there. I know that there's a real movement out there to fix that, and we need to encourage that to happen. So what is one thing, like how do you want everybody to get involved? What's the call to action you would ask
As an entrepreneur, I think, we never thought, or at least personally, I did not think of food or production of that and so on and so forth as a thing to do or a problem to solve. I think that narrative has to change. And we, as entrepreneurs, need to embrace that as another sexy business to get in. And that's my thought.
Okay.
For me, I think it's about taking ownership of your choices that you make every day. And it seems sometimes insurmountable about what we're facing with climate change, but you're making that choice every day at breakfast and at lunch and dinner and snacks and in the way we educate our kids. And to throw some more statistics at you, the average school lunch, only $1.19 is actually spent on the food. $1.19, guys. Like, this is the future. If we're not going to prioritize our kids' health, then what are we prioritizing? And this is where all these decisions are made. It's by us, right? We are the voters that are putting everyone, the elected officials in office. That's our choice. It's our power. And so it's a moment of just remembering that we have the power, we can do it. It's in our daily choices, and it's who we put into elected office.
Last
Yeah, so again,
idea.
small question. I think one of the things I'm really interested in, I've been working with philanthropists around this question of how do we harness, I think the impact investing work is so important, but also how do we harness philanthropic dollars to help kind of beta test the innovative policies and beta test these technologies and explore kind of that edge of what I really see as this moment of urgency to really develop those nature-based agroecological solutions and the policies that will support them. And I think when you start seeing that policy work on the ground, you see exactly what you were talking about in terms of how food can bring diverse people together, and to your point, Deb, about how food is key for empathy. One of my favorite events ever was at the launch of a policy in LA called the Good Food Purchasing Program, and on stage with me was an animal rights activist, the head of the public health, the county public health division, an environmentalist, a Teamster from the local labor union, the Teamsters, the CEO of a food distribution company, and it was like harmony on stage because they had all seen their shared interest in this new procurement policy in LA. So I really feel that sense of how can we harness philanthropy to invest in those kinds of innovative policies that can really make the kinds of changes we need.
Fantastic. I like that. They're one of our grantees. So
Yes.
I'm really glad.
And we didn't plan that, so that
No, we didn't. We're done. Thank you very much. And remember, go to www.foodvisionprize.org on October 29th. And if you're interested, put your vision forward. Thank you.
Please welcome Alexis Bonnell from USAID.
Hello. I am so happy to be here because I have one of the best jobs on earth. I get to serve as the Chief Innovation Officer of USAID. And what's been such an honor and a privilege in that role is that our teams have been able to see over 20,000 ideas and fund more than 1,200 different types of social impact around the world. What's been interesting about that is that we're not alone, right? We're all here today representing that. And what was also a great part of my job, number one, is coming to places like SOCAP and getting to fangirl out about the social entrepreneurs that are here, whether that's Vision Spring and COPA, Simprints, Atma, DREV, amazing, amazing entities. What was also interesting about my job, though, is that I have the great privilege of working with so many different funders around the world to do some of the same thing, to look for interventions that are truly game-changing. Not only other funders, other nations. I just came back from Paris, meeting with over 20 different funders, and we realized something. We realized over the last few years that one kind of storyline kept coming out. And that storyline was, unfortunately, two myths. The first was that nothing is scaling. The second is that there's no investable deals out there. And I have to admit, I bought into that for a while. And it wasn't until I started having a conversation with a few other funders, well, I said, well, what's in your portfolio? Is there anything, scaling? And someone mentioned, yeah, actually we have this thing that's hitting 1 million lives. Now, what's interesting about social entrepreneurship is oftentimes the social entrepreneur is seen as the hero. And that's awesome, because being a social entrepreneur is hard. But it's also seen as a little bit cute, a little bit of a human interest story. And so when we started to realize, wait a minute, some of you are impacting 1 million lives, that's not cute. That's real impact and real business. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to come together, and we're so proud to announce today an intentional movement to bring not only the funders, the entrepreneurs, the investors of the world together to recognize the Million Lives Club. We were struck by the fact that there is an S&P 500, a NASDAQ, all of these things for amazing companies out there, but there was no S&P 500 for social impact. There is today. I want to introduce you to the Million Lives Club. Great. So first of all, I wanted to recognize where. So some of them are actually here: Vision Spring, One Acre Fund, Simprints. In the audience, we have Skoll, Grand Challenges Canada, ATMA. So they're here. They're amongst you. And what's really important, we wanted to realize, is number one, there are a lot of organizations that not only are already hitting 1 million lives, 1 million customers, by the way, 1 million customers, not beneficiaries, but more importantly, some of them are adding 1 million customers a year. If that's not investable, I don't know how you define that. Then we also wanted to recognize the fact that this is a journey, and many people are on this journey, and not yet at 1 million lives, but coming close. So we introduced the category of Vanguard. These are all, and Vanguard are 1 million or more. We then introduced the idea of Voyagers. Voyagers are those that are looking to reach, are on their way to reach 1 million lives. And mind you, these are 1 million customers that live on less than $5 a day. And so we wanted to recognize the organizations that are on their way. Finally, we also wanted to represent the theory of pioneers. Some people are having incredible, incredible impact, but they're doing it in places like small island nations, where there might not be 1 million customers, but they're having huge impact in the percentage. The reason we're here today is because what we learned about doing at least 41 challenges at USAID and moving billions of dollars through challenges, prizes, and ventures is that most of you only find out about it when we announce the winners. I'm seeing some nods in the audience. So what we're doing today is that we're announcing our first cohort. But the Million Lives Club actually is open today, and it will be open every day over the coming years. Every 6 months, we will add to this cohort until we reach our S&P 500 of social impact. So today, I ask you, go to millionlivesclub.org. If you are on your way, if you are an innovator, we want to recognize you. What's so exciting to me about this is 2 things. Number one, there are amazing things out there that, in my case, never applied to USAID. Maybe we weren't smart enough to pick them if they did apply. But all of a sudden now, this wakes me up to realize what our options are when we look to tackle the world's greatest challenges. And the last thing I want to leave on, which I think is so important and so powerful, is that these organizations that are on this list, you don't get to 1 million lives because you've made USAID happy. You get to 1 million lives because you're delivering customer value, because you're doing things and providing a service that the customer actually wants and needs. So our challenge to you, outside of joining this amazing cohort, we're going to be pulling our next cohort on January 10th. So please apply. If you're an investor, get your organizations to apply. But most importantly, let's learn together about what the customer centricity, the idea of delivering real value, actually does, because it's impacting more than 260 million lives and growing. Thank you very much.
Please welcome to the stage Jennifer Skorsh from water.org and Tom Ferguson of Imagine H2O.
Hello.
Water. Water.
He's a crazy British man, be careful.
Yeah, this will become abundantly obvious in not very long. Water is one of those things that doesn't take up a huge amount of time at organizations and meetings such as this, which is, I've always found a little bit odd, because at the core of all of our work, no matter what you do, lies the fundamental molecule. So whether you're in education, if you're in education and you're trying to make sure that these young minds are growing, if they're suffering from lead poisoning, or if they're suffering from chronic diarrhea, you are not having the impact that you could have if they were healthy. If you are in food security, obviously, water is absolutely fundamental to you being able to do the job that you are trying to do. If you are an impact investor, and it's my first time here, but I hear there are two of you in the audience, it's worth remembering that for each of the last 5 years, water has been selected as one of the top 5 global risks by the World Economic Forum. But the real kicker for me is that 3 of the remaining 4 are fundamentally tied to water. Our ability to deliver water at the right quality, at the right quantity, at the right place, and at the right time is absolutely fundamental to our survival. So now that we've got deep, you're probably wondering who on earth I am. So, my name is Tom Ferguson. I run the accelerator at Imagine H2O. We are a non-profit organization with the mission to empower people to develop and deploy innovation to solve water challenges globally. We are 10 years old, and we've worked directly with 141 companies and thousands more applicants to solve these kinds of challenges. We are affecting tens of millions of lives daily. And we have raised, the companies that we have worked with have raised just under 500 million, 300 million of which has come in the last 2 years. Things are hotting up, so pay attention. But we are here to talk about building and scaling an impact organization in water, and we are in very good company. There are very few people within the water sector that really have a right to talk about this, but one of those people is sitting to my left. Jennifer Skorsh is the president of water.org, and she has previous in scaling an organization. Straight out of business school, she joined a coffee company with 150 stores. And 8 years later, Starbucks had turned into the global brand that we know today. She then took her considerable talents to water.org, where alongside Matt Damon and my celebrity doppelganger, Matt Damon, who is my celebrity doppelganger, should have got that one right. Because my celebrity doppelganger isn't Gary White.
No.
Not yet anyway. Alongside Matt Damon and Gary White, they have built an organization that has impacted over 22 million people worldwide. So, in terms of building and scaling an impact organization, I think we have the right person on stage with me. Jennifer, how are you?
I am well. I mean, look at this audience, all here to make big change.
Absolutely. So in terms of the big changes, I would like to start at your time at Starbucks. So when you think back at your time working within that change, what are the lessons that you keep on coming back to as you build water.org?
Yeah. I mean, in many ways, as Tom said, I feel like I grew up at Starbucks,
Right.
and so there were lots of lessons I was learning steeply. There's probably a handful that I find that I am regularly deploying. We've got some technical issues, sorry. And so I'll just keep talking as Tom gets fixed. I think the first one's probably, it's all about your people. It's all about the people. Most of you probably know about the visionary of Howard Schultz behind Starbucks. But many people don't know about Howard Behar and Orrin Smith. And Howard Behar did and still does say it's all about the people. And it's 2 things. It's about the people that you work shoulder to shoulder with in the mission and making sure that you're putting in place mechanisms to value them. And it's about the people you serve and being very clear on who they are. So that piece was very much ingrained in me. I think the other piece was about being very clear on your purpose. we had a mission statement, and it was posted everywhere, to be the premier purveyor of specialty coffee in the world. And we had the great pleasure of working with Jim Collins, whom you in the room and those online will probably remember wrote Built to Last, Good to Great. And he worked with a group of us, and in that process, we realized that actually our core purpose was not about the coffee. It was about the experience we were providing, and we shifted to define it as to inspire and nurture the human spirit. So being clear on purpose is something that I think I've carried forward to water.org. Aggressively innovating. We always felt frustrated that we just were getting to the top of a mountain, and little did we know, but Howard saw that there was another mountain behind that to scale, and it was hard. We had to become comfortable with discomfort. And then lastly, I think it was about failing forward. Many of the people in the room have had a Frappuccino at some point, but what you might not know is that the precursor beverage was called Mazagran. It was an awful tasting carbonated coffee beverage. It really was bad. It was overpriced. It failed. But what came out of Mazagran was the coffee extract that made Frappuccino in the stores and in bottles scale. So a failure became a multi-billion-dollar business. And it was only because we learned and failed forward. So those, it's all about your people. Be clear on your purpose, aggressively innovate, and fail forward. That's probably what I've taken most into water.org.
That's super helpful. I'm very disappointed I never got to try Mazagran.
Yeah, I've got a 4-pack in my attic.
Oh my God.
I do.
Maybe it's got better with age. That's really helpful, and we're going to come back to a couple of those. But I want to talk now, one of the things we get really excited about in water is people who come into water from outside. Right? People who come into the sector, usually people grow up in it and go, right? But come in with a skill set from outside and bring their knowledge to bear within the water sector. So when you got out of Starbucks and you were thinking about the transition, where you were going to go next, how did you choose water, and how did you choose water.org specifically?
Sure. So for me, water really kind of came from two things, an interest and an indignation. On the interest side, I had always had an abiding interest in the environment and in women and girls' empowerment. And the more I learned about water, the more indignant I became, because girls drop out of school for lack of access to water and sanitation especially. Women can't work. Kids get sick and die, more than 1 million a year. And, it sort of struck me that one day I thought to myself, on what planet is it okay that our girls go out at night to relieve themselves for privacy and they don't come home? So there was an interest piece, and there was a deep and kind of growing indignation, and it's what still gets me out of bed in the morning. And then in terms of water.org, it's funny because I don't think I realized it at the time, but I wanted my time to matter, and I wanted to make a difference. And I wanted to do it in an organization that, this is the hindsight part, it turned out I went there for the reasons that I went to Starbucks. So there was a big challenge / opportunity. There was a fundamental, compelling model for scaling that was exciting to me. There was visionary leaders and team and people that I wanted to be around. You've presented me as an expert, but I'm learning every day, and I have the immense pleasure of working with really great people, not just within the organization, but in partnership across the sector.
It strikes me that one of the things that water.org has done best is something that all organizations of all stripes and colors and types, is that one of the really difficult things to do is focus, right? Is to decide what you're going to do, but actually more importantly, what you're not going to do, and then think about how you differentiate relative to a customer pain point, and then go and deliver that thing. Is that a fair reflection? And do you think is that definitely the case?
For us, that's definitely the case. And I think when Tom introduced water, water is just such a big topic, and we need big brains and good thinkers and innovation in it. And you, Tom, and Imagine H2O are doing a great job of that. For us, in terms of just the focus, I guess I come back to those lessons at Starbucks a little bit. And if you take Howard Behar, HB's message about love your people and know your customer, it might be worthwhile spending just a moment on who that person is for us, because
Right.
that creates a real focusing element for us. So our customer is someone like Lenaritzia, whom we met in the Philippines, who pays $60 a month. It's about 25% of her income to access safe water from a water vendor who comes into her village. Now, Lenaritzia has a municipal water system that runs not too far from her house, but she can't afford the $200 of upfront capital that she would need to connect to that system. The utility doesn't think she can be a paying customer. The banks don't think water and sanitation is something that can be lent for. And so our insight and what we've really focused our time around is enabling affordable access, affordable finance to someone like Lenaritzia. So we work with largely financial institutions. We take our expertise in water and sanitation and a grant. We will grant that to help them build the capacity and a lending portfolio for water and sanitation, and they will lend Lenaritzia that $200. Now, in about a year's time, in her case, she paid the loan back, so her $60 monthly cost is now $5 a month. She has safe water at home, she has more income, and she has more time. And so the idea is about taking that philanthropy and using it to give a hand up and not a hand out, and to realize that people living in poverty are not equally poor, that they can participate in their solutions. So that piece, that focusing piece, is really, really important to us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just hearing you talk about this, there really is very little difference between the startup founders that we work with kind of day in, day out, and
Yeah.
where you're looking at it. You're essentially just an innovation organization, not just an innovation
and you're
organization.
saying, what is the problem you're trying to solve?
Exactly.
Stand in your customer's shoes and say, what is their challenge? And don't try to fix it for them. Help them address their own challenge.
It's such an important insight, and I think that this is something that people often lose sight of, is that actually the trust, I mean, it's as true for your clients as it is for your own people, right? You wouldn't just go and solve your own people's problem. You've got to give them the tools to go and, let them get on with it. So you see it as the same thing for your clients.
Yeah, we do, and I think that, again, kind of hearkening back to those lessons from Starbucks, I think that, what's your purpose? Like, what is our purpose? Our purpose is about enabling access to water and sanitation, but we're doing that through affordable finance. So we're focusing on people who live on $6 a day or less, and we're focusing on using philanthropy catalytically.
Yeah.
So we can use a small amount of donated funds to mobilize significant amounts of commercial capital. And that blended approach is what we feel is really important. There's a $90 billion a year gap between what the World Bank estimates is needed to put just in place the infrastructure for water and sanitation and what is available through philanthropy and aid. And so we're focused on that. We're using philanthropy catalytically. And in terms of just results, the $30 million that we've deployed for this model, which we call water credit, has helped mobilize $1.8 billion in capital. And that's money that's going to the hands of people living at $6 a day or less, who otherwise would not have access to water and sanitation. And it took us 25 years as an organization to reach our first million people. And 7 years later, it's now 22 million people. So there's a real scaling effect when you can use philanthropy in a way to crowd in more capital and scale the impact.
For all you fans of hockey sticks in the room, there's one for you. This conversation would not be complete without talking about where everyone always walks into a wall, right? There are always challenges and failures. Can you talk a little bit about the fail-forward element?
Yeah.
And how you've seen that
Yeah,
transpire?
I can. So I think the biggest failure where we had to fail forward was around the initial iteration of water credit. We tried to make loans directly, and we loaned to an institution, then on-lent to emerging community-based organizations that were emerging utilities. And what we didn't realize is that they didn't have the business skills to understand how to build a sustainable utility in that case. And there wasn't a culture of repayment. So we failed forward to India, where there was an infrastructure for microfinance, there was an infrastructure for repayment, and we were able to pilot it there and scale it to 12 more countries globally.
So this doesn't work there, but where is actually the structures that we can move it over, where we
Yeah.
think we have a better chance of, that's fascinating,
Yeah.
rather than just pulling the plug completely, which would have been some people's approaches. So we've got 2 minutes left.
Oh boy.
All of these faces out here have already benefited from your expertise, but if you want them to take 2 or 3 things away with them from once we're done, what would those be? What do you think that really lies at the core of this scaling question?
I would maybe leave folks with 3 things to take away. So one is choose water. We have to put in a plug for the essential molecule.
Yes.
But we've talked about the need, and I guess I just want to touch on the opportunity for a second. And maybe it gets back to that indignation I talked about. But it's estimated that women and children spend about 200 million hours a day, and you heard me right, a day, in collecting water. And I guess would ask you all to think about, what if we unleashed that power and that potential, that we could help those individuals transform that cycle of poverty into a cycle of opportunity? And I just can't even imagine what 200 million hours a day for women and girls around the world could result in. So choose water. Bring your talent, whether it's water or something else, bring your talent. We need scalable business models. There are models that exist that can be funded, and that there are others that can be created. And so we need, as I said, big brains and good thinkers on this issue. And then I think I'd say bring capital. We didn't and won't have a chance to talk about how we think about capital, but we need philanthropy, we need impact investment, which we also have a sister organization that we piloted and stood up called Water Equity, that is an impact investment fund, fund manager focusing on water and sanitation for people in poverty. And we need balance sheets. We have a global credit enhancement facility that we're launching this year. So choose water, bring your talent, and bring your capital.
I told you she was the right choice. We are out of time. So if you want to know more about this, Jennifer's going to be around for a bit. I know one of her board members, Tony Stainer, is here. There are various people wandering around to do with water. There is Tony.
I didn't
there
know
is Tony.
that.
Hi, Tony.
Hi, Tony.
I thought you might do that. And then we have a session on Thursday at 1 o'clock about investing in the best story you've never heard of, water. So all come and crush the room. But it leaves me to say this has been an absolute pleasure, and please welcome me. Please join me in welcoming Jennifer Short.
Thank you.
Mishmin Tuhis, Conracat Canyon, Coyote Woman, Sarah's Roots. I'm a Mutsunaloni, California native. My homelands are very south of here, but I'd like to acknowledge the land that we are at right now. Can I hear you say Yalamu? Yalamu. May I hear you say Ramatush? These are first words and first languages of the land. I come from a matrilineal society. My mother, my grandmother believed that when song, ceremony, and dancing stops, so does the earth. I too believe that, and I would like to offer a grandmother's song to honor our grandmothers, their grandmothers, and in all Mother Earth, for without them and without her, we would not be here. We share this time and space together for a reason, so it's with that humility, that gratitude, that present-mindedness that I offer this song in this space with you today. Moi moi yo koano, moi moi yo ko, moi moi no, moi moi yo ko, moi moi yo ne yo konale, moi moi yo konale, moi moi yo koano. Moi moi o nei ai o konale. Moi moi hei ai o konale. Moi moi o kano. Moi moi o ko. Moi moi no. Moi moi o ko. Moi moi o nei ai o konale. Moi moi hei ai o konale. No son. And can I hear you all say, oh, oh. It is so very important that we acknowledge the land that we are on in today's post-colonial settler society. And I want to introduce Chairman Jonathan Cordero of the Association of the Ramaytush Ohlone Peoples.
Hersha Tuhe, everyone. My name is Jonathan Cordero. I am the chairperson of the Association of Ramaytush Ohlone Peoples. We are the original peoples of the San Francisco Peninsula. And I'd like to share with you today a lament and a challenge. The original peoples that I'll be talking about today are the California Indians who were incorporated into the mission system from Sonoma to San Diego, and we're a part of that group of people. After colonization, or I should say as a result of colonization, we lost about 80% of the indigenous population from Sonoma to San Diego along the coast. After Spanish colonization, we confronted state-sponsored genocide. And by state, I don't mean the state of California. I mean the federal government paid money to people in California to kill California Indians. As a result of colonization and genocide, California Indians today, still today, are impoverished in a number of ways. That's the lament. Here's the challenge. I teach at a private liberal arts university. And self-critical examination is the core philosophy of a private liberal arts education. And so I'm always asking my students questions. So one of the questions I ask my students is, what percentage of the population do you think has access to a private liberal arts education? 5%? 3%? 1%? And the next question, of course, is a hard one, which is, and what are you going to do with it? Obviously, you're privileged. What are you going to do with it? So I want to make that same challenge to you. We are here on native lands that have been taken from people, and we all benefit from it. And we know those native peoples are still suffering from the adverse effects of impoverishment in a number of ways. So the question to you then is, what are you going to do with all of your gifts, talents, resources, and privileges? And my suggestion to you is that when we all reconvene next year, that some of you take time to give back to the native community in the Bay Area on whose land you are now, in this case, visiting. Some of you obviously live here. So I'm going to leave you with that challenge. Enjoy your week. Listen, learn, grow, and give. Thank you.
And in coming in with song, we will leave with song. As an Indigenous woman who travels around the Bay, consulting and voicing, bringing in Indigenous pedagogies and teachings and wisdoms to recognize that if we all honor our elders and honor our ancestors have Indigenous lineages to the land that they originally come from. And to recognize that Indigenous protocol reminds us to recognize whose land we are on. Indigenous peoples being the first stewards of the territory, it's so very important that we come humbly, respectfully, and be good guests, and be welcomed by good hosts in a good way. And so in closing, I want to offer a hummingbird song, because hummingbirds are here in the Bay, and they're beautiful, and they travel, and they pollinate, and they're just kind of like my personality. Humunya, 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 weha, weha. Humunya, 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 weha, weha, ho. Humunya, 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 weha, weha. Humunya, 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 weha, weha, ho. Humunya, 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 weha, weha. Humunya, 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 weha, weha, ho. Humunya, 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 weha, weha. Humunya, 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 weha, weha, ho. Oh, and welcome to Yelamu. Thank you for your time.
To kick off Latium at SOCAP, please welcome Rodrigo Villar of New Ventures and Raul Palmeras of Sonin Capital.
Good afternoon. Let's try that again. Good afternoon. Much better. Thank you. First of all, I want to thank SOCAP, of course, for inviting us to speak here today and for shining the spotlight on Latin America. My name is Raul Palmeras, as you heard, founder of Sonin Capital. This is a good friend of mine now, Rodrigo, from New Ventures. For those of you not as familiar with Rodrigo and his work, just to quickly sum it up, he's spent the last 15 years on the, from within the region building much of the Latin American impact investment ecosystem, starting with an accelerator that today, that supports over 150 entrepreneurs on an annual basis, starting the green pages, if you would, so a listing of green companies, later starting the FLEA, which for those not familiar is effectively the SOCAP of Latin America, which is celebrating its 10th year in February. God, the list just goes on and on and on. What you and started Adobe Capital as a fund, and now Biwala providing new forms of financing. So, beyond kind of what you and your team at New Ventures have done, share with our audience and kind of give a little bit of perspective. What's happening in Latin America? What does the impact investment ecosystem look like? How big is it? How do people define it from within the region?
Thanks, Raul. Thanks for that intro. And thanks, everybody, for listening. So we started 15 years ago promoting, the term didn't exist at that time, the impact investing, but we were promoting environmental, social companies in the region. And it just has been booming lately. I mean, the impact investment ecosystem in Latin America, I think, is probably the second biggest one in the worldwide, receiving and investing. And it keeps growing. It's interesting how it's not just venture capital or seed stage capital going to social entrepreneurs or impact entrepreneurs. It goes everywhere. You see corporates investing in funds, investing in seed capital, just also opening their accelerators or their programs. You see governments getting into the ecosystem. You see a lot of family offices interested in the region. So it's booming, and I think it's integrating a lot of people. So entrepreneurship is growing in the whole region of Latin America, but I think impact entrepreneurship is growing more than any other industry. I think Latin America is a region that has a lot of local money. It has a lot of innovation, a lot of talented people, a lot of entrepreneurship, and also probably the most important thing is that we have a lot of troubles. We have a lot of things that we need to fix. There's a lot of, but we always think in Latin America that all these problems, all these troubles we have to change the whole system and think about those as opportunities. And I think that's what is happening in Latin America. We're figuring out that if we want to find solutions for most of the social things or social troubles or problems we're heading, we need to shift our energy and think that those things are not going to change if we don't find innovative ways to work with that. So I think what is happening is that a lot of entrepreneurs are driving that change. They are tired of waiting in philanthropy or governments to fix those problems, and I think they're using technology, using innovation to find solutions for those problems. So, and one of the biggest misconceptions when people think about investing in Latin America, they think it's difficult, they think it's hard, and it's not. I mean, people figure out when they just catch a flight to any place in Latin America, and you will see that there's a bunch of people, thousands of people that they did their MBAs in Ivy Leagues in the United States or in Europe, and they speak the same language, they do business, and the business community is booming. So it's not that it's hard, it's just complicated. You need to understand it because we are too many countries. We speak the same language, but we are very different countries, and problems are very different in every single country, but the opportunities are there, they're booming, and I mean, we keep growing everything we do, the accelerator, the fund, and it's, I will say that Latin America has these big opportunities for impact, but also have a booming business community integrated with different asset classes, different governments, and different non-profit organizations working together to drive this change. But let me get back to you, Raul. Like, the first time I came to SOCAP probably was 10 or 11 years ago, and Raul was in this plenary session. I mean, we were just talking about impact investing, and Raul was talking to 1,000 people about how he was driving change in the world and allocating all these assets. And suddenly, after 3 years ago, we ended up being friends. I don't know what happened, but I think that was because you started to getting interested in Latin America. For some reason, you ended up, probably was it tequila or the parties, but I don't know what happened, but Raul ended up traveling every month to Mexico and Latin America, and we become really good friends. I wanted to know why, like what happened to you? What happened that you started looking to Latin America like as a big opportunity to invest?
Well, fair enough. So several things actually for me, and you actually touched on one of them when you talked about that local money, because several years ago, reading the Capgemini World Wealth Report, boring report for many probably, but nonetheless, it's basically a survey of wealthy families from around the world. And there was like one thing that kind of struck me that was very interesting. On this page where they'd asked the question, what's the probability of increasing your allocation to social impact investments? Of all the regions in the world, Latin America scored the highest. I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. The overwhelming majority, that's an interesting fact. Two, from a professional perspective, I actually started my career. So as much as I hadn't been there doing much, I actually started my career in private banking, working with wealthy families in Latin America when I first started. So that was another thing. So I thought, candidly, maybe a bit arrogant, but nonetheless, I thought, well, wait a second. If this is a thesis, having worked with that community in the past, having the experience in impact investing, I thought I was in a pretty good position to test that thesis. In addition, first-generation Cuban-American, married to a Mexican who had been spending all this time traveling all over the world advocating and talking about impact investing. At some point, I kind of woke up to myself and said, wait a second, what am I doing for the part of the world that is kind of I'm most rooted in culturally and identify with? Why am I not spending more time there? And as you know, I finally did take you up on your offer, and I did come down, and I went to the conferences, and yes, the parties were great, but candidly, what really blew me away, what impressed me the most was not just the scale, the quantity, the quality from entrepreneurs, different types of asset owners, just the level of engagement that I saw throughout the community really drove me to say, you know what, there is a huge there, and something that candidly, this is a great opportunity for me in terms of what I want to accomplish, but I think for all of us as an ecosystem and environment. So yeah, it's time to start spending some more time down there, and with you and others, of course, now I've built these great partnerships. So taking what you said, that's what happened. Now, at the same time, we know the region. You already touched on a few of these kind of myths and misconceptions. Like the region does have a lot of myths and misconceptions. And I think, it would be interesting just to kind of hear from you, kind of, what are some of the key ones that you think of? I know you touched on one in terms of the level of diversity that exists in the region, but talk about a few other kind of key myths or misconceptions that many in the audience may have when it comes to Latin America.
Well, yeah, as I mentioned before, one is people think that it's really difficult to do business in Latin America, and it is if you don't have the right connections or the right path to start. But if you want to do it, it's easy. I mean, it's a very well integrated community, as I mentioned. but again, it's a lot of countries. Some are very small, some are very big markets. Like if you put together Brazil and Mexico, Mexico is the 13th economy of the world, and Brazil might be the 9th economy of the world. So they're both big economies, and Brazil by itself could be a continent. So it's complicated in that sense, but on the other hand, there's a lot of willingness of people to do business. There's a lot of innovation. There's a lot of excitement about impact investing. Usually we have a lot of philanthropy that used to be very traditional. They are shifting to move towards impact investing. There are also a lot of facilities as well. So in many countries, it's just very easy to get into because there's not a lot of barriers, and there's not a lot of competition. The other thing it's really interesting is that family offices are starting to invest a lot of money. So with our first fund, with Adobe Capital Fund, the first fund, we just had like a couple of investors from the region. And now probably half of our investors are from the region. So we're seeing that every time is much more excitement. And some other things like violence. It happens, it does. There's a lot of violence. We have a lot of countries. And probably right now, a little bit more. You see what's going on in Chile, what's going on in Ecuador. Yeah, we have those problems. But it's Latin America. We have those, all the history. And that's not going to change, probably.
Well, and as we all know, it's not just happening in Latin America today. You can see it happening in Spain. You can hear it in the UK. I mean, there's stuff happening not just in the global south and places like Latin America.
It's happening, but that's what we are there for. I mean, that's what we're fighting for. That's where we want to create these businesses that reduce inequality. And that's what is going to reduce that violence. I mean, that violence is not just because we're Latin America. They come because there's a lot of inequality. And if we don't fight it, we don't create different sources to how we approach education in a more innovative way, it's not going to happen. But I think the biggest asset of Latin America is that we already understood that. We know that our governments are not going to solve those problems. We know that philanthropy is not going to solve those problems. We have to do it through innovation, and I think there's a lot of excitement. There's not a lot of technology in Latin America. It's not that we have those innovation labs that we're going to create the new technologies in the world, but there's a lot of innovation about how to define new business models to solve like health problems, education problems, housing. We see lots of entrepreneurs just finding approaches to solve those issues. And that's what is really exciting about what is booming impact investing across Latin America.
Yeah, and I would just add on that same tone, I think a couple myths that I see often, and one that I think we've all experienced across the globe is this concept you often hear, oh, there's no deal flow, there's no deal flow, there's no deal flow. And I think unfortunately in a place like Latin America, that perception has been highlighted by some of the industry's own activities. Take for example with no ill will whatsoever to our friends at the Ginn and Cambridge Associates, but many of you might recall back in several years ago they published this impact venture capital PE and VC benchmarks and put out the charts and the numbers. And I think one of the things that struck me was right away when you look at that chart, it was completely dominated by funds in Africa, the U.S., in Asia, and there's this tiny little sliver that was kind of Latin America, and so I picked up the phone and called over there and said, hey guys, I'm looking at this report and this analysis, I see you've split out all these things, can you give me a little more color on Latin America? And what the response was, well, it's not statistically relevant because we only had 6 contributions to the constituent universe. What, 6? And and then spending that time down there and getting to see, we've identified 6 funds that contributed to that universe. We've identified well over 100 funds in the ecosystem that are operating. And yes, it's an immature marketplace where 48% or so of those funds may be first-time funds, but it's 48%. So guess what? That means the other half, at a minimum, maybe on their 2nd, 3rd, or maybe even 4th fund. So they must have at least done something right. And so I think what the failure is getting those stories out. Why weren't those other 40 or 50 funds that likely were already on a fund 2 aware of and connected to this global ecosystem so that they too would be reported? So I think that's one of the major misconceptions. Like I said, I think as an industry we're doing a good job knocking that down globally, but we've got plenty of work to do in Latin America. And I think another thing that you said is really important about Latin America, because I've literally heard these words. Rodrigo mentioned multiple times the inequality that's driving the needs and some of these opportunities. I can't tell you though how many times in talking with impact investors, maybe some of you in this room, who are allocating capital to the global south, but when pressed on the question, what are you doing in Latin America? You know what the response is? It's too developed. Really? It's too developed. And yes, we talked also about that there's this local capital and this local money, which is there. But you also have to look at that. When you look at the Gini coefficient, which is basically this measure of inequality, Latin America is one of the most unequal parts of this. Scores unfortunately the worst in terms of inequality. And so which is kind of inherent in what impact investment is really an incredibly powerful tool to solve. So, there is deal flow. As you've said repeatedly, there is need and opportunity. And what we just really need to do is, like I said, as SOCAP is doing with this event, shine the spotlight. Let's get this community, let's get this region kind of plugged in into this global community, which I think for the first time now starts to seem to be kind of happening. Kind of coming up near, as we start to wrap up this conversation, Rodrigo, why don't you just, some closing thoughts? How would you want to kind of finalize, leave this audience understanding what either from a risk perspective or really opportunity perspective you see for the regions that they should be considering?
I always say that Latin America, in our perspective, is the best place to do impact investing. I mean, if we have this kind of bipolarity, like we have a lot of troubles, very diverse countries, very poor populations. Sometimes, just the case of Mexico, I think we have at least 50 million people under poverty lanes. I mean, that's a lot of poverty. And some other countries like Nicaragua that are much less developed than others. So there's a lot of needs, but on the other hand, there's a lot of highly educated, well-trained, innovative entrepreneurship. There's a community. We see that is thriving. When we started New Ventures 15 years ago, I remember reading the Fortune magazine or the business magazines. There was just talking about big corporates. Now when you open those magazines, they're talking about social entrepreneurship all the time. I see most of the innovation is going to solve this trouble. So you have these big opportunities, and on the other hand, you have this industry that actually works. Sometimes it's difficult, sometimes it's hard, but there's infrastructure. There are lawyers, there are accelerators. It works. I mean, there's a lot of funds that are booming. You have government supporting this growth. So you have these two sides that define an impact investing industry. Something we need to be aware is that I always say that impact investing is different in different countries. I think how people define impact, I see that every country has their issues that are more relevant to another. Like, for example, gender inequality. I see probably in some developed countries is much more important, but in some other countries is more access to no hunger, just try to get to more basic things. So I think in Latin America there are a lot of things that you have to solve. And in different countries, you need to understand the local needs. We run the FLEE, this Latin American conference is growing very fast. And as I mentioned before, there's a lot of interest from all the sectors. And I invite all of you to visit Latin America, to do business in Latin America, to invest in Latin America. There's a lot of people here. We have a Latin lounge for the first time in SOCAP, which I really appreciate, to Intentional Media and all the organizers of SOCAP to put attention in Latin America, because we really need it. We need to, and we believe also that we can also not just import innovation. We believe that we're building new things and probably new ways to solve impact issues and we are sure that they're going to come from Latin America. We're doing really exciting things, and I'm sure we're going to see more Latin American entrepreneurs in the scene in the future years.
So I would just add in closing, look, as we talk, I don't want to sound very Pollyannish here, but in terms of, we clearly understand that there are risks, right? There are risks, there are all there are issues, but these risks are inherent everywhere else. So as I would just say the challenge, if you're an impact investor and you're committed to investing already, and you have the risk appetite as it is to invest in the global south, make sure you get kind of Latin America on your radar. not only because if you're prepared to understand how to assess, evaluate, and mitigate those risks wherever possible, it does represent this highly compelling opportunity. And said simply, when it comes time to those diligence trips, and you got to think about that, I'll just tell you this: the water's warm, the food is great, the music will get you out of your seat. And we can all do what we like, which is, doing well by doing good. And actually, Latin America lets you also have a lot of fun while you're at it.
And you're going to get the best returns, financial returns.
There you go. Excellent. Well, thank you all so much. And we look forward to being with you over the course of SOCAP.
Thank you very much.
With a special announcement from the Thomson Reuters Foundation, please welcome Nick Glitcher.
Thank you very much. I have the very great privilege today of being able to launch the findings of the Thomson Reuters Foundation's perception poll on the best place in the world to be a social entrepreneur. To make my life a little bit easier, we've prepared a short video. It is short, so don't fall asleep or anything. But a quick video to help explain a little bit more about the poll and about the findings as well. So can we cue the video, please? So, who came top? Canada came out top this year. So it's been a big couple of days for Canada. Is this bigger than Trudeau being re-elected? I think it is. I think it is. So congratulations to Canada. One of the things that you'll notice by looking at the top 10 is the fact that neither the UK nor the US appear in the top 10 this year, which I think is really interesting. And I want to speak a little bit about some of the findings that I think are really interesting and why a perception poll like this is really important. So, we spoke to 900 experts in 45 countries to ask them what they feel about social entrepreneurship in their home country. So these are people that live, breathe, work every day in social enterprise to help understand what they think the current sentiment is in their country. This is a perception poll. And why is that important? Why is it important that it's perception? It's important because perception is everything. Perception is the thing that moves economic markets. Perception is the thing that makes people, that allows people to make the decisions that they're going to make. Social entrepreneurship is about encouraging people to do things differently, to do business differently, to treat business as usual as something new, to act differently. And for that, perception is incredibly important. And so this is why we've done a perception poll. Effectively, when you ask people about their perception, this is the zeitgeist of society. This is trying to work out what society feels about a key issue. So what can we learn from a perception poll? Because of the data that we've got and because of the fact that there's been some interesting changes this year, there's real opportunities, particularly in events like this where there are people from all over the world, to try and help understand what is best practice, what does it look like, what is it that different markets can share with each other, that people can learn, what is it the Global South can teach the Global North, what is it that we can learn, how can we get collaborations to make sure that we are working out what is best and how we can replicate it in different markets. So, the poll itself, we asked experts to answer questions on these 6 different topic areas, these 6 key metrics. Our view is that there is not enough data in the world about social enterprise globally, and this is why we do polls like this. For this particular poll, we partnered with Deutsche Bank's Made for Good program, their social enterprise program. And this is a repeat of a poll that we did in 2016. So a lot has changed between 2016 and now. And this poll allows us to, this perception poll, allows us to get a sense of what the heartbeat is in different countries now, what's changed, where countries are really strong, where they're weaker. And as I say, there's a lot here about what we can learn. So the poll itself is part of the Thomson Reuters Foundation's work to try and strengthen the social enterprise ecosystem. The foundation has 3 key focus areas. We focus on inclusive economies, media freedom, and human rights. And doing work like this perception poll on the best places in the world to be a social entrepreneur fits really neatly for us into our work in inclusive economies, where we do a lot to try and help support social enterprise and inclusive ecosystems. And that includes things like raising public awareness about social enterprise, about inclusive economies. We have daily news coverage about social entrepreneurship, and alongside that, we provide direct support to social enterprises on the ground, whether that's through free legal assistance, other types of capacity building, media training, communications training. So I want to speak a little bit about some of the things that came out of the poll that I think are the most interesting. So, Canada. We know that Canada came out top, but one of the things that I think is really interesting is the fact that the US dropped quite so much. As that little video said, it was over 30 places it dropped, and Mexico dropped an awful lot as well. So what is it that is happening in the Americas that means that Canada can have such a strong showing, whereas its neighbors to the south are not doing quite so well? Is it that NAFTA has broken down? Probably not, because Canada is doing really well. So what is it that the US can learn about Canada's policies, about the way Canada works and operates, that it can help share? And what is it that Mexico can learn as well? The country that I think that was most interesting from the poll itself, the perception poll, was Nigeria. So Nigeria polled really, really strongly, both in terms of the way that social enterprises help support women leaders, and also the way that young people are getting involved in social entrepreneurship. On the women question, Nigeria polled about 20 places higher this year out of the top 45 economies in the world, which is a massive increase. And what is it that Nigeria is doing there? What is it that means that the local population in Lagos, in other markets in Nigeria, feel that women have a really strong role to play in social enterprise compared to in other markets? What is it that we can learn? What is it that we can do? And there are lots of people that are here at this event this week that are either from Nigeria or represent Nigeria, and I implore you, go and speak to them, try and work out what is going on there. What is it that Nigeria is doing that the rest of us can learn from? Medellin in Colombia is another really interesting success story. It didn't appear at all in the 2016 poll, and this year has come out in the top 5 for cities, a city hotspot for social enterprises. There's clearly really interesting work that is being done at a municipal level in Medellin, and again, like, what can other cities learn? There's lots of people that work here for local governments. What can we learn from Medellin's example? What is it that they're doing there that is so special, that means that people in that market recognize that it's a success story, and more importantly, people in other markets understand what Medellin is doing and recognize that there's successes there as well? One of the big things about social enterprise is the feeling of social entrepreneurship in the market. Do local markets feel like there is momentum that is growing and building around social entrepreneurship? We've set out here the top 10 based exclusively on the question around momentum. But in Belgium, which came 37th in 2016 out of the 45 countries, Belgium is now up there at number 4. The Netherlands was also joint 37th in 2016 with Belgium and has come in at 11. The UAE has risen 22 places in the ranking as well. What is it that is happening in these markets that mean that local people feel like there is real, genuine momentum, that there are more opportunities, there are more people getting involved, that there is a drive for more businesses to be acting as social enterprises? Again, these are questions that we're putting out there with this perception poll. We want people to start thinking, what can we learn from these different markets? What can we do to encourage this in our own markets as well? Now, last but not least, I wanted to speak very briefly about issues to do with investment. This is SOCAP after all. This is a really key issue for the attendees of this conference. There are 3 questions that we asked around investment. One around grant funding, how easy is it to access grant funding, another around the ease of accessibility of investment, and a third around non-financial support. Now, in terms of grant funding, the top two were France and Singapore, which are very, very different markets with very different histories and attitudes towards supporting social enterprises, towards supporting social businesses. Of particular interest around investment was the fact that three of the greatest climbers in the perception poll this year are China, Thailand, and Indonesia. So there's clearly something interesting that is happening in East and Southeast Asian markets. Again, what is it that we can learn? Is it the growth of the ASEAN region as a whole, the integration that's happening there? These are questions that we need to be asking, and particularly in markets like the UK and the US that had such poor showings this time round. What can we do? What can we learn from Indonesia? And then lastly, as a Brit, and therefore dealing with whatever is happening with Brexit at the moment, the last question around non-financial support I thought was really interesting because in a reverse of what has been happening in the EU, Germany drops dramatically in the perception poll here, and Greece rose dramatically. Given the tensions between those two markets about the dominance of Germany in the EU and how Greece has been very reactive in terms of what's happening in efforts to strengthen its economy, this again is really interesting. There's something that's happening in Greece that enables people to get far more non-financial support compared to Germany. And what is it that Germany needs to be learning from Greece as a result of this? As I said, this is a perception poll. This is about people understanding their local markets, what they feel is going on, and therefore this is an understanding of what the momentum, what the enthusiasm, what the local passions are in markets. But this is a great opportunity for people to speak to each other from different markets, for countries that have fallen dramatically in the rankings this year, to try and understand what we can do to drive change, what we can do to get that momentum up and running again, to make sure that social enterprise, that impact investing doesn't stall, that this continues to grow, this movement continues to grow, and it continues to be the driver of reinventing capitalism. I'm going to be here all week. Come and talk to me. There's lots of work that we're doing as well. We want to be able to engage with different organizations that see this as an opportunity to drive and champion change in their own markets. And with that, I will leave you to the rest of the event. But thank you very much.
Please welcome to the stage Andrew Brower of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, Marcus Gonzalez of Vamos Ventures, and Rod Robinson from Connexus.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here with us. My name is Andrew Brower. I am with the Mission-Driven Investments team at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, and I am very honored to be joined by two amazing professionals that we're going to be talking with this evening here for a little bit of time, Marcos Gonzalez and Rod Robinson. But just really quickly, I'd like to just take a second to talk a little bit about the foundation, our work here at SOCAP, and why we care about this work and why we wanted to bring Marcos and Rod out here to really feature their story and their leadership throughout the country here at SOCAP. So the foundation was founded in 1930 by serial innovator and entrepreneur Will Keith Kellogg, and from day one we have been focused on children. But we know that children live in the context of families and communities, and our goal is to make sure that we are helping create, through our philanthropic giving, helping create conditions, find leaders, and build opportunities for equitable communities so that all children can thrive. Back in 2007, our board of trustees, they took a step back and started to examine our own policies and practices and issued a mandate that said that we want to be an effective anti-racist organization that promotes racial equity. The very next year in 2008, we we founded our mission-driven investment program. And as we started to think about the different tools that were at our disposal and started to think about impact investing, we took a look at the data that was out there. And some of the striking data that we know about, that we really care about, that we think speaks to the conditions that exist in communities and conditions that affect children out there, is the racial wealth gap, where we know that the racial wealth gap between whites and blacks is 20-1, and the racial wealth gap between whites and Latinx communities and individuals and families is about 17 or 18-1. We know what created that space. We know what created that disparity there. We know it started with colonialism. We know that then enslavement. We know Jim Crow. We know segregation. We know policies of voter suppression. And immigration policies that are here. We know what caused it. So if we want to start to close that, and that's just a handful of some of the policies and practices and structural barriers that are there, if we want to close it, then we have to do something very intentionally and very different than what actually created that. 3 years ago, we started to work with SOCAP, and we helped establish the racial equity track. We caught a lot of flack about, oh, hey, how come you're having just a tracker on racial equity? Well, the year before there wasn't one. So we wanted to make sure that we actually started this conversation and started to bring it to one of the places that was holding this up in a national platform, in a place where incredible people like yourselves, and even with just a broader audience nationwide, are actually here and can engage and start to build their literacy around the history of race and racism in this country and what it means in particular to the capital markets. So as a team, we were thinking about this year. This is our third year here, and we said, hey, you know what? We're a little bit done with the conversation of sort of like, should we or shouldn't we do this impact investing conversation, or should we or shouldn't we sort of have a racial equity lens? Why don't we actually just talk to some folks out there that we already know are doing this work and bring them up and help us understand, not necessarily should we do it, but actually who's doing it, what they're doing it, and then most importantly, how, so that we can actually start to take some of those actions and connect some of those dots from all the different networks and experiences and opportunities that you guys have. So I'm gonna, so Marcos Gonzalez and from Vamos Ventures, Rod Robinson from Connexus. Rod, I'd actually like to start with you if you don't mind. Can you just tell us about the story of Connexus, where it came from and why you're in it?
Sure. So I come from a corporate background in procurement and supply chain. And so I wanted to, I'd grown frustrated over time, and I wanted to dispel the myth that it's difficult or impossible to find minority and women-owned businesses to introduce into the corporate supply chains. So that was really my key motivation for launching Connexus. Conceptualized it 9 years ago, actually launched it 7 years ago. So essentially what we are is a cloud procurement platform that supports and enables key corporate supply chain initiatives relative to supply chain transparency, diversity, and economic impact. We have an underlying data collection engine that enables us to track this information. And essentially what we've been able to do over time, as we've continued to grow our customer base, probably 14 Fortune 100 companies to date, we've been able to build a database of 21 million SMBs. Included in that is 1.8 million diverse suppliers. So we're really pleased. So mission accomplished in terms of, dispelling that myth that, there are no diverse suppliers, we can't find them.
Right. Excellent. Marcos, Vamos Ventures. Tell us why and what you're up to.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much for inviting Andrew, and thanks everybody for being here at SOCAP. Vamos Ventures is a venture capital fund, diverse manager, impact fund. We invest in diverse teams, but we have a particular focus on Hispanic tech entrepreneurs throughout the country. The impact that we want to deliver is wealth creation, social mobility, and tech-driven solutions that help or empower vulnerable communities. And the way I got to this is that my career has been basically in strategy and investing, and spent a long time doing that, and it was really the meeting of my professional career and my personal experience. I'm Mexican-American, my parents are from Mexico, son of immigrant immigrants to the country, and really grew up in an environment where I saw a lot of entrepreneurialism, resilience, creativity, innovation, et cetera, et cetera. And a few years ago, I was in the Bay Area, and of course, there's a lot of, the idea of the lack of diversity in tech is not new, and it's been around for a long time. We took a look around, basically, and we said, what's going on here? Clearly, a lot of wealth is being created. The future is being defined here, generally speaking, but we and people of color are not very present. So we took some time to look into it and found hundreds of companies throughout the country of diverse entrepreneurs that had products and that had traction, just couldn't get in front of the right people. So we finally concluded that there's a need here. And that's when we started Vamos Ventures a couple years ago.
Yeah, so both your businesses actually have a sort of a theory of change or a business model that has racial equity embedded into it. Why is that important? Is that are you seeing market opportunities because of that? Is there a competitive advantage with that even?
Well, one of the areas, one of the statistics I like to share is the fact that of the 28 million businesses in the U.S., over 50% of those businesses are minority or woman-owned. However, they only account for 6% of the total revenue generated. So when you think about the fact that more innovative small startups create the jobs, the net new jobs, but the fact that they only represent 6%, but over 50% of all businesses, there's something wrong with that. So to the extent we can flip the script on that, if you will, there's an opportunity to really close some gaps. So that's what keeps me energized.
Yeah, I would echo that. And competitive advantages, I think we have plenty at Vamos Ventures. Number one, we're not competing with everybody else for the same deal. It drives up values, and that doesn't help anybody other than the founders of the company, I guess. But then they have to live up to it. What we do is we find deals that are overlooked, deals that maybe are not in Silicon Valley, not in San Francisco, but other parts of the country that are overlooked. Detroit, for example, Atlanta, Nashville, in other cities like San Antonio, for example. So that strategy of looking for the non-usual spaces is key. Number two, a bunch of studies, McKinsey, Credit Suisse, et cetera, about diverse teams outperforming average, the non-diverse teams. That's another advantage. So I think that for a impact fund or investors, whether you're individuals, institutional asset owners, whatever it might be, clearly there are competitive advantages here.
Yeah, I think what I'd like to add to that is the fact that, I was sort of creating a solution based on a frustration that I had, and it was really focused on diversity. But now the fact that we sort of created this solution and we were laser focused on it, we were able to sort of gain these customer relationships that enabled us to really broaden to become a broader supplier relationship management solution. So it went from just being sort of focused around, inclusion in the supply chain, supplier diversity, but then we continued to add attributes like sustainability, like financial health. And so now having supplier diversity sort of at the nucleus in the DNA, we've been able to really create this supplier relationship management platform that's now becoming valuable to customers that are, e-commerce platforms, for example, where we're able to actually vet and validate third-party sellers, right? Creating value for them. So it's really interesting to think that you can kind of have a laser focus on solving one specific problem. You're creating, it's almost like kind of creating, when I think about organizations where I've worked that have won awards for creating the best environment for minorities and women, it's almost like you create a better place for everybody. So it's almost like we've created this solution that's now sort of morphed into this supplier relationship management platform that's something unique that no one else has.
Right on, Rod. Marcos, I'm curious, one of the stat that we talked about sort of our why for our team at the foundation is around the racial wealth gap and closing that. I'm curious how, as you're making investments into communities and communities that are frankly just overlooked, how are those investments manifesting in that wealth creation and that opportunity for overlooked communities?
I think there's a lot of pent-up demand in these communities. Certainly, I think amongst entrepreneurs of color and definitely amongst Hispanic entrepreneurs. A couple stats, 80,000 Hispanics turn 18 every month. It's 80,000 turn 18 every month. It's a very large demographic in the country, and it's not just in California, it's in Texas and New York, Illinois, Florida, but now it's also in North Carolina. You know, it's in Memphis and Nashville and Tennessee. So we're seeing a lot of folks throughout the country that's building a lot of pent-up demand, as well as the decreasing cost of starting companies is really enabling a lot of entrepreneurs. The way we find them is through personal, professional networks, and of course, anyone who's in the business of developing diverse entrepreneurs. Those are folks we want to know and we're developing relationships with. But as I always say, Andrew, and I think you would attest to this too, Rod, is there are a lot of great organizations throughout the country that are supporting diverse entrepreneurs. That's awesome. But what we don't have, and what we definitely need, the other side of that equation is we need diverse investors. Investors who are familiar with these communities, investors who can identify personally with these entrepreneurs, et cetera, and have intentionality around it. I don't think we can rely on ad hoc and accidental investing that might happen.
Rod, any closing thoughts before we move on? I'd like to.
Well, I would just say that I would just like to applaud. I've been to many conferences, but this is one conference where I've never seen so much passion. Everybody's so focused. Everybody's passionate about what we do here. But I will say this, the last time I was here was 2012, and that's actually where I met one of my first investors, who happens to be an impact investor, Keisha Cash of Impact America Fund.
Right.
So, you know, the one thing I'll say about what I've learned since then, have attracted additional impact investors, Social Entrepreneurs Fund, Serious Change. I will say, had it not been for the early belief from organizations like that, impact investors, I wouldn't be here right now, because that enabled me to obviously bring in the patient capital that was required to get the company to a point to attract, you know, that Series A, where we were able to attract the sort of broader mainstream venture capitalists. But you're absolutely right. I think having that context is so important. Not only the asset class of impact, but I think having a more diverse cadre of investors will make a huge difference.
Marcos, anything you want to leave us with?
Yeah, I think that you know, there are a lot of things that we've learned on this journey, and one of them is that you find what you look for. And if you're an impact investor or you're with an organization that's an impact organization, you really do have to have a lot of intentionality around it and get out the door and look in different places and be clear about what you want to find, because you have to get out there and do that. And that's what we've done. And thankfully, we've been doing well. So I think it does work, and I think you know, that's what we're going to see with our fund.
Yeah, Rod, and I really want to elevate that story you said coming back here in 2012. I want to applaud the SOCAP team for frankly having the courage to name racial equity as a focus 3 years ago and to keep on going with that. But the brilliance of this place and this space, and as it relates to impact investing in the capital markets, is how the money is going to flow through networks, and this is an incredible opportunity to build and thicken those networks, because Marcos and Rod are absolutely amazing, incredible leaders. There are people sitting in these chairs right here that are the same, and also throughout all the content that's going to be here and beyond. I mean, Keisha's here, as you know, as you mentioned, several others. This is not about like whether or not we should or we shouldn't, or where can we find people. It's about intention. It's about intentionality. It's about building your literacy where you have tracks to be able to do that, so that we can understand and see new opportunities, and then actually making these deals happen, so that we can start creating wealth in intentionally overlooked communities to create more equitable opportunities. So, thank you for your time, everyone.
Many in this community knew Jason Spindler as a passionate, fearless change maker, someone who believed that everyone should have a voice, an opportunity, and access, someone who spent the last 10 years building this community, to empower those that were going to build this community with him, and to give a voice to people that don't often have a voice. Jason spent the last 10 years co-founding and leading IDEV International to bridge finance, emerging markets, to get capital to starve social and medium-sized enterprises. He did so really at the expense of enjoying some things for himself, but he enjoyed every minute of it. He lived fully. Jason comes from strong values. He started his career in investment banking on Wall Street. He used his tech knowledge and his restructuring knowledge to take it into this community. He went to the Peace Corps. He, instead of leaving 9/11, went back and pulled people out. Unfortunately, on January 15th of this year, Jason was killed in a terrorist attack in Nairobi, Kenya, with 23 other brave individuals that also were dedicated to human rights, to equal opportunity, to people having a voice. Jason is largely responsible for me being in this community. Jason was a fierce friend, supporter. He allowed me to create the vision that I have for Align today, and I'm enormously grateful. We carry on his vision, his passion for making a difference. We hope that you will join us on Thursday morning at 8 a.m. to share your stories, to remember him, to honor him, to give his voice what will come next. It is really with a great honor that I introduce his brother, Aaron Spindler, who will announce the initiatives of the Jason J. Spindler Foundation that was created in 2019. Jason was 40 years old when he passed away, but we all have a responsibility to continue that legacy.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm really honored to be here to speak with you guys today and share a part of my brother's life that he found incredibly special. He was always really pumped to come attend these conferences and really look forward to coming to San Francisco and spending time with this community. And as I researched a little bit more about this conference, it really started to make sense why he really enjoyed it here so much. Jason truly lived at the intersection of meaning and money. And it's at this intersection that he used his big ideas and endless tenacity to become a catalyst between underdeveloped markets and the money that they need to be kickstarted in order to help businesses and people develop, achieve sustainable and meaningful growth. This work really gave Jason's life meaning, and it's the JJS's foundation. It's our mission to continue that meaning and drive his impact for future generations. We are currently right now giving out an award for the UNDP, the United Nations Development Program Award for Innovation. It's a $10,000 annual award that goes to an early stage outstanding company that shows responsible use for data to drive impact. This is an annual award, and we are also trying to raise the level from 10K to 50K and are currently seeking partners to help this happen. And then the foundation is also established and is establishing scholarship endowments at the University of Akron, the Middlebury Institute, NYU, and the University of Texas, Jason's alma mater, in order to help select the future generation of thought leaders and help them take their thoughts and ideas and turn into action. So if you guys are interested, come join us at the breakfast to learn more about my brother and the JJS Foundation. And once again, it's a pleasure to be able to speak with you guys. Thank you.
The breakfast will be in the Festival Pavilion past the LatAm lounges. So it'll be in the back of the Festival Pavilion. Please join us at 8 a.m. Thursday. Thank you.
Jason was a really special member of this community. He actually lost his backpack in this theater last year, and I remember Friday seeing him come across campus with a huge smile on his face because I was holding his backpack. So that's my last memory of Jason, and I'm so glad we got to honor him here today. One thing that just leading off of that, the reason it's so important to recognize this is because all of you are valuable to this community in that way. You all have contributions, and I'm honored every year just to recognize how much this is a collective lift. All the sessions you see, all the amazing things in that festival pavilion are people proactively saying, I have something to offer here, and we're the platform. So whether that's through our blog, through our podcast, through the flagship, through our other events, bring us your voice, because we're not here as the ones who know it all. We're the ones who have this platform to share your stories. Share your stories while you're here with hashtag SOCAP19 and hashtag SOCAP Stories. And I want to remind you, so tomorrow morning, the breakfast that they mentioned is on Thursday morning. Tomorrow morning, breakfast starts at 7:30. Yoga is also available from Marlon Hall, who you'll hear speak in the plenary tomorrow night. That's at 7:30 by the Firehouse. We have Gender Lens Breakfast, which is a great hallmark of SOCAP. That's also at 7:30. And then sessions start at 8:30, plenary is at 4. I know you guys are gonna rock it. Let's head to the welcome reception. Thank you all for being here.
Oh, okay. Well, so I work in the world of philanthropy and fundraising, so my responsibility is to take care of our supporters, our donors. These could be people, or they could be sponsors, corporate sponsors, or foundations. And I, this organization, do you want the name of the organization?
No,
You
just
don't?
like
Okay.
to have the context and see why it was worth standing on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty small, but I was working with a donor who was pretty important on an event that we were running, and she was both a personal donor herself, and she was a member of a board that I worked with, and she also